Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs, and this is Sally Ann Sachs. And today we're glad to welcome Leon Taranto. Welcome, Leon.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to have you here. Leon is specialty is the Sephardic Jews of the Ottoman Empire, and in particular, he's going to talk to us today about the Jews of Turkey and of Rhodes,
and Izmir,
and Izmir. And these are things we really know absolutely nothing about. So if you have a map to maybe start us off, or to show us where in the world we're talking about.
In this book by Haim Benart, which is a book of historical maps, there's one in particular that shows the migration pattern well. It's this one here. The shaded area is the heartland of the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, Greece, and the Balkans. And we see the sweep of Jews across the Mediterranean, going across Sicily and Italy into the Balkans, Greece, and Turkey.
Okay, and Leon, before the show, what we were talking about, the Jews of Rhodes, especially in Izmir, and I asked you, when did the Jews come to Rhodes? And you said, actually, what?
Actually, first of all, there were Jews there during Roman times, and Jewish community continued to exist there probably during the years of Byzantine rule, which is up through the 500s, 600s, into the 1100s, 1200s. In the 1100s, we know that a famed Jewish traveler, Benjamin of Tudela, found Jewish communities there. Historians have written about Jews from Tarragona in Spain fleeing persecution in the year 1280 and going, of all places, to Rhodes.
And the Jews that lived there before the expulsion of Jews from Spain and Portugal, the Jews who lived in Rhodes were called the Romaniote?
Romaniote, right.
And they spoke Greek?
Greek was their principal language.
And what about Izmir, which is where I understand your family is from Rhodes and Izmir. What's the story in Izmir?
Izmir area, it was called formerly Smyrna,
right.
In Turkish Asia Minor, was an area of brisk and intense Jewish settlement during the Roman era. The population dwindled under years of Byzantine persecution from the 500s, 600s into the 1200s. Ultimately, by the 1300s, the conquering Turkish armies absorbed it, and it was a backwater port, remained so until the late 1500s, at which time a Jewish community began to take root there in strong numbers, very into the 1500s, early 1600s. Spanish Jewish emigres, very largely from Salonika, and also Italian Jews came in, Portuguese Jews.
I see. And so your family's name means what? Taranto means?
Taranto is a city in southern Italy, but it's also a popular name among the gypsies, the Roma in southern Spain, in Andalusia. There's actually a flamenco singing troupe called Los Tarantos that we saw when we were in Spain.
So can you trace your family that far back, or to Italy, or?
No, I can find family names of mine in Spain in particular. Crespin is one of the family names. Al-Hadef is another one of the family names found in Spain. But in order to trace going generation by generation back, on some of my family lines, I can get back to the 1600s, but no earlier than that.
That is just amazing. 1600s in a Sephardic Jewish family. The reason most Ashkenazic Jews can't do it, and we have access, a lot of access, to archives. And the thing that always strikes me about Sephardic research is that there are no archival, that the Turkish government has not opened its archives for research. And so you can't go looking up official documents. So what do Sephardic Jews looking in Eastern Mediterranean use for research?
There are a wonderful array of offline sources aside from what's on the web. One book in particular is a multi-volume series by Avram Galante called History des Juifs de Turquie, which is in French. It's very, very good. It goes through individual communities and will give you lots of family names. Now, there are a series of archival records.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but is something like that available at the Library of Congress, for instance?
This would be available at the Library of Congress.
But would an individual researcher such as you be able to do genealogy research, or is this basically background information?
This is largely background information. It at least gives you clues and lets you know which places to look for various family names, and will tell you occupations.
Okay.
Doesn't typically give you the relationship father to son or daughter.
Okay, so then where do you go from there?
There are some archival records at the Central Archives for the History of the Jewish People in Jerusalem. And there are resources such as dowry records for Izmir, Smyrna, that go into the 1800s, in which the brides and grooms are identified. The fathers of each of them are identified, and sometimes the paternal grandfathers as well.
These were Jewish community records? That's what I was distinguishing.
Right.
The Ottoman records are not available, but you're saying there are some Jewish community records that are available?
Yes, they were kept by the rabbinate.
So you would have to know what community or what town they lived in.
Yes. Now, you could check with the Central Archives and inquire as to what records or what files for which they have communities.
Right, but in recent years, a number of Jewish genealogists have been mining, is the word. Not so much Rhodes, but Izmir. Lawrence Abensur, who puts out Etsy, or has family from there, and I guess she's done some. Does she get primary sources? What kinds of things does Etsy write about?
Well, one of the things that Etsy has written about, for example, are European consulate records. There are, for example, different European consulates that provided protection to Jewish subjects. And Jews were employed there in various capacities, as a dragoman, a translator, or doing commercial affairs. There's some records that are kept by the Dutch, for instance, of the opium trade. And a series of Tarantos are listed in connection with the opium trade.
Where?
In Izmir. There was a very brisk opium trade certainly in the 1800s. It may have gone on before, but in the 1800s up through the early 1900s.
I didn't realize it was
I had
there,
never
too.
heard about the Dutch records. I knew about Italian and French, but the Dutch were also doing
Do
protection?
you want to hold
The
up
Dutch
that?
as well.
Let's hold up that.
What does this tell?
This is a registration, a certificate from the Consulate of Izmir. It concerns an Isaac Taranto who was born in Izmir in the 1880s and migrated to New York.
I see. Now, maybe we should tell our viewers about how it came about that the Dutch and the French and the Italians had these, were protecting local residents. It was the capitulation treaties.
Yes, capitulations.
And do you want to tell a little about
A
that?
little bit. There would be various wars or various diplomatic pressures brought by European countries among the Ottoman Turks, and they would try to gain rights of protection, let's say, for Christian populations within the communities, Greeks and Armenians primarily. But in time, they realized that they could also develop their commercial affairs through Jewish populations. The British, for example, exercised protection among over the Jews in Syria and some of the places in the Ottoman Empire as a counterweight to French protections over Maronite Christians.
So you would find these records in the archives in Paris and in Rome and in London.
Right.
These are diplomatic records.
There is for the Italian, there is a consulate in Izmir that maintains records. And you're able, through email, I was able to write to them and obtain information on some Papashata branches. Now, Lorenz Abensur Hazan has actually gone to their offices, looked at original records, and found much more. So in making email requests, you don't get nearly as thorough of a response.
And so the Italian consulate still in Izmir today has the records there?
Yes.
Back to the 1800s.
Right.
Amazing. And some of the other sources that you've used, what kinds of other things have you used?
Well, for Izmir, there's a listing of brides and grooms that's maintained by Dov Cohen.
Who is he?
who is in Israel, in Jerusalem. He's with the Ben Zvi Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And the records are written in Soletreo, the old Sephardic script, which is very difficult to read or decipher.
Is that like Hebrew script in that language?
It's parallel to Rashi script, only Rashi is probably a little bit easier to read because in Western cultures we're more used to seeing it and learning it.
So it's the written form of Ladino of
Yes.
And Ladino was the language that
Right.
the Spanish, Hebrew, or whatever it was that the Sephardic Jews mostly spoke. But then I recall that there's something about Alliance records. The Alliance Israelite, whatever
Yes.
the whole name was, I can't remember.
There are two books that I brought here with me today. There was an organization that was Paris-based called the Alliance Israélite Universelle.
Yes.
It started around 1860, and
The teachers of
it
the
developed over 100 schools spanning the Islamic world and some parts of the Christian world, where Jews, Sephardim, Mizrahi Eastern Jews settled from Morocco all the way to Iran and into Turkey, Greece, and the Balkans.
This is sort of totally off the wall, but is that sort of like what Ort was doing, opening schools in Eastern Europe?
Yes.
Are you familiar with that at all?
Same idea. The idea was to bring the
To
Jews
education.
of this part of the world into the modern era,
Right.
and under the French culture, which they saw as the highest form of culture, and they actually were very influential in many parts of the Sephardic world, I think.
Yes, and that's why people like my grandfather, Papa Shadow, went to their schools. He learned to speak 8 languages, became a translator in Egypt at the very first decade of the 1900s.
Right, and their records are maintained in Paris.
In Paris.
And actually, Lorenz has done quite a lot of research in those records and is...
Yes, and some very good examples of those records are available in Etsy, which is the publication of the
here we've
that
got-
is put out by Lorenz Aben Sur Hazan. It's a historical journal, Sephardi Genealogical and Historical Review in Society. It is the first journal established primarily for Sephardi genealogy,
Yes.
and it may still really be the only journal that is primarily for Sephardi genealogy, although there are many for Sephardi history and culture.
Well, we thought that the Sephardic Jews were a little later than the Ashkenazic Jews in getting started on genealogy, but it seems that it's really growing.
We're catching up.
You're catching up.
Give us another year.
You've been working on this how long?
For about 25 years.
Oh well, I guess that's why you have this stack of
You
books.
were obviously one of the early ones doing the research then.
I see something here on the very top that intrigues me. That little paperback book,
Yes.
the Jewish Martyrs of Rhodes and Kos. Is it pronounced
Yes.
Kos?
Kos is a nearby island.
How does one find out that such a book exists?
Well, a wonderful source to find the existence of such books is Sephardic House in New York. They have a website for Sephardic House, and on the website, many of the books of Sephardi interest are listed, including the books that are brought here today on the Alliance Israélite Universelle. Now, many foreign books are not listed, and there are a lot of foreign sources as well.
When you say, so they list the books that are published
Yes.
in the United States. And so that's next one down, Sephardic Jews in the West Coast states. That's pretty specific.
This is very specific. That's part of a 3-volume set. That one in particular is on Seattle and Portland, Oregon, and also the crypto Jews of the American Southwest. There are also volumes on Los Angeles and another one on the San Francisco Bay Area. And eBay was where I found
Why
mine.
Rhodes and Seattle go together? Why is that? I mean,
Well, I understand from relatives who live in Seattle that they liked the seacoast and that the area and the climate reminded them quite a bit of Rhodes.
so there's a large group of
Yes.
Jews from Rhodes in Seattle, Washington, who came in about what the turn.
They started coming around the turn of the century, and not just from Rhodes, because there are actually 2 Sephardi Ottoman Empire-based Sephardi synagogues in Seattle that are
Really?
basically within about a block, 2 blocks of one another. Ezra Bessaroth, and the Bikur Halim. And Bikur Halim is mainly Turkish mainland, Marmara, European Turkey.
Mm-hmm. And the other one is?
And the other one is primarily Rhodes Italy.
What happened to the Jews of Rhodes during the Holocaust?
Rhodes was taken by the Germans late in the war, after Italy had surrendered to the Allies and switched sides and joined the Allied side. And the Jews of Rhodes were arrested en masse by the Germans and deported and taken to Auschwitz from July and August of 1944.
Well, that was late.
And also the nearby island of Kos. There were 1,700 plus, and of them, less than 200 survived.
Wow. But
There were 50 Jews who actually were protected by the Turkish consul. He extended whatever protection he could get and tried to argue that various people were Turkish citizens if they had any connection with Turkey at all.
But some managed to flee, and some went to, of all places, the Belgian Congo?
Yes. What happened was, there was a Jewish population of several thousand, probably around 4,000 or so, 1938. Jews was under Italian rule from 1912 to 1943. And under most of the Italian period, the Italian rule was very beneficial for the Jews. They prospered well. And at some point, Mussolini became tightly aligned with Hitler. And when he did, in late 1938, they started doing a special census for identifying and listing all the Jews and preparing to deport anybody who came after 1919. So many Jews left in anticipation of that expulsion, which never came.
I see. And you have a document here that reflects that census?
Yes, I have a document from the 1938 census. This one in particular is very important to me because it shows my great-grandmother, Mazel Tov Crespin. It identifies her parents. Curiously, one of her parents in this census is shown as a Signora Taranto, and yet there's an earlier census, Italian census of Rhodes Jews from the 1920s, which has a different name for the mother. It's not Taranto.
Oh,
so.
how funny. Where did you actually get that census?
This census, the census for the Jewish community of Rhodes for the 1920s and the 1930s, the actual records are kept at the Office of the Jewish Community on Rhodes.
There is still a Jewish community?
It's small. It's several dozen people, a couple of dozen people.
But they have they are the only ones that have this census?
They're the only source that I know of that has them other than individuals. Now, they might exist in Israel, but if they do, I don't know that, and I haven't heard of that. Okay. So different friends and relatives have been able to get different census pages for me, and I've accumulated entries for over 1,000 people.
How many? Your database is how big now? You told us.
Well, for people who are my ancestors and their descendants, 4,000. But linked
impressive.
to them and linked to them by blood or marriage are another 21,000. And basically, we're talking overwhelmingly Ottoman Empire Sephardim from Greece, Turkey, the Balkans, some from Egypt.
And you're going to do what with this database?
Well, I'll use it as a source to probably generate articles, things of that nature. I'll try to help people as best as I can to find their families. I was working in particular with cousins in my Al-Hadeh family because they were descended from Rabbi Moshe Israel, who has started a rabbinical family on Rhodes.
You mentioned there were two families by then.
Right. There's a website called Les Fleurs d'Orient, which has also lots of Sephardic names. And Leon said, they have mistakes in their Rabbi Israel line. Apparently, this is one of the problems: is names. You said the names overlap so much that sorting out who's who.
Israel is a common name, and therefore it wouldn't be unusual to have chief rabbis of communities who are named Israel and have them come from different families. Even on Rhodes, you'll find names that one may not think of as being quite as common, but they're common on Rhodes, and as a result of that, when we look through the 1920s and 30s census or Rhodes Holocaust data or immigration to the U.S. or cemetery data, we'll see multiple listings for the same person. Like Rachel Capelouto, for example. My mother has a grandmother, Rachel Capelouto. My father has a great-grandmother, Rachel Capelouto.
They're not the same ladies.
They are not the same.
Oh, that is complicated.
Did they possibly come from the same family, Capelouto family, if you go back
Right.
far enough? Or
Probably.
is this just,
What happens is Rhodes is an island, and since it's an island, most of the marriages that occur within the community. Now, the community crested at probably around 5,000, 5,500. There was also a considerable amount of intermarriage with the Jewish communities in southwestern Turkey and also in Izmir, and strong commercial ties between the community too, because they were on the same trade routes.
I see. What haven't we covered that we need to cover here?
but last names, did you mention last names? Or when did everybody seem to have last names going far back, or?
There are, yes, they do. What we have available and what can actually be seen on the web are gravestones on the Isle of Rhodes going back to the late 1500s.
Who put those on the web?
Well, Aaron Hassan is the person who is the head of the Rhodes Jewish Museum. He's an attorney in Los Angeles. His uncle is a first cousin of mine by marriage.
And where is this museum if he's in Los Angeles and
Well,
it's Rhodes?
The museum is actually in Rhodes, but the website is operated out of Los Angeles. And they have a traveling exhibit that goes to several cities in the country now, because they have an 800-year-old Torah that is from Rhodes. It's been dated by carbon dating. It comes from Rhodes.
And where is it physically located now?
It was in Buenos Aires, and it's now in Los Angeles.
At the Skirball Museum, or?
No, I don't know. I think it probably is under the custody of the Tiferet Israel congregation.
And speaking of names, that was Baruch Pinto's first book. We have his more recent one back here. This is a compilation of Jewish names from Turkey, or from where?
It also includes Salonika and Greece and various congregations. It covers a little bit wider area than just Turkey.
And Taranto is definitely in it.
Taranto is in it. Most of my family names appear in it.
And then in this new book, what he's done is to try to give the meanings of these names. We'll see if you agree. His says Taranto means from Italy, or that it's from Italy. And you're saying there was a city in Italy with
Yes.
this name.
Right.
Does your family have a tradition that the family came from Italy, or don't they know?
No, that's never really been discussed, that there's an Italian tradition. As far as we know, the family has for many, many generations spoken Judeo-Spanish. They've been Spanish-speaking, and there's not an Italian tradition. The same on my Capua family. Capua is a town in southern Italy. It had a very significant Jewish population in Roman times. And the Hebrew form of our family name is Mekapua, meaning from Capua.
Yeah.
So let's recap. We have about 3.5 minutes left. If somebody wanted to do research there, they're going to have to get on the web, and they're going to have to really network to find out where these books are, to find the books from their specific area, but the data is somewhere in books. Is that right?
Much of the data is in books. There are online sources as well.
You said what would be the best place to go to online if you wanted to get started?
Probably the best gateway is the website for the Foundation for the Advancement of Sephardic Studies and Culture. That is a gateway that will take you into many other sites. It will also take you to lists of family names. It will give you a background understanding of Sephardi genealogy as well.
Are they located at the Center for Jewish History in New York?
They are.
So that
Does Jewish journalists link to them at all?
I have no idea. Do you know?
If not, they ought to.
I don't know.
Because I haven't seen.
Jewish Gen has a separate webpage that's run by Jeff Malka, which is also a wonderful gateway.
Okay.
And Jeff Malka's website certainly links to Foundation for the Advancement.
Right. They have a Sephardic SIG, which I guess
Right.
Jeff must run.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's
Okay, so you could get to it by going to.
Right.
I'm always trying to simplify it if somebody's starting rather than giving them
Right.
a dozen addresses to go to.
and we never even touched on the whole thing, a book called Jewish Publication and Printing Houses in the Ottoman Empire, because newspapers are.
Yes.
When you don't have a nice list of birth, death, and marriage records from the archives, You get to be very resourceful, and you use things like a two-boat and other. That's another list of
And there's
things
some
I've seen.
examples of that in Etsy. There's an article specifically about newspaper sources in the Ottoman Empire, and some of the listings included very close relatives of mine, great aunts, great uncles.
Do these newspapers exist in any form anymore?
Well, certainly some of the issues exist. I'm not sure how Lorenza bin Sur-Hazan accessed the ones that she found, perhaps at the Sorbonne in Paris. I think
Hebrew University has some.
New York Public Library might have some.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Library of Congress has some. I mean,
That
I
might
have
be-
found
Right.
German newspapers from 150 years ago there. It's incredible what they have, but I have no idea whether they would
So
have this.
mostly your research has involved travel, mail. How have you proceeded mostly?
An incredible volume of email communications, because I have lots of relatives. There's so many people that are from Rhodes here in the United States, and also worldwide, in Belgium and different places throughout the world that.
Oh, so they went
exchange
from the Belgian
information.
Congo to Belgium.
Right. I've had contact with people born in Burundi and living in Rwanda. One of them who went back to Rhodes to get married.
Oh, is that
Well,
interesting?
that's fascinating. Thank you so much. I haven't said much because I've just sort of been spellbound by everything you've been saying. Thank you very much, Leanne, for coming and
Thank you very
telling us
much. I
about all
enjoyed
of
it.
this.